Emily had arrived in Grayford with the intention of staying only a few days, yet the night of the fire changed everything. The town, with its quiet mills and rows of modest houses, had been wrapped in stillness when the sky suddenly tore apart. A blazing trail of fire stretched across the horizon, descending with a weight that shook the ground. Windows rattled in their frames, and the forest on the town's edge seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Emily had stood frozen, her notebook clutched in her hand, as silver sparks drifted downward like falling embers, vanishing before they reached the earth. When the tremors faded, a silence heavier than before consumed the streets. Some residents emerged from their porches, pointing to the woods with unease. Others shut their doors, unwilling to acknowledge what they had seen. Emily felt the pull of the phenomenon and instinctively knew she could not leave it unexamined. She walked through the night, her steps guided by the faint glow that lingered beyond the tree line. By morning, groups of townspeople ventured toward the site, expecting to find a crater or burning wreckage. Instead, the ground was untouched, no trees were broken, and no ash marked the earth. The only evidence was the strange metallic scent that clung to the air, sharp and acrid, as though machinery had burned unseen. Birds did not sing, and the forest seemed stripped of life. Even the usual rustle of small creatures was absent, leaving only the sound of the wind threading through the branches. As dusk settled again, Emily walked the edge of the forest. The metallic scent was stronger there, heavy and persistent, as if the air itself had absorbed the memory of fire. She noticed how her skin prickled, as though unseen sparks drifted against her arms. Her instincts told her that the night had left a mark deeper than anyone could see, that something had entered Grayford and would not be easily forgotten. That evening, she sat in her small rented room, listening to the uneasy quiet of the town. Lights in neighboring houses flickered, and she caught sight of people drawing curtains early, as if wishing to block out the memory of the burning sky. She wrote in her journal about the silence of the animals, the lingering metallic taste in the air, and the silver embers that had dissolved before her eyes. Her words were uncertain, but her resolve was not. Whatever had fallen or appeared had chosen this town as its stage, and she knew her connection to Grayford had just begun. The Hayward mansion stood at the far edge of Grayford, its blackened frame looming over the overgrown fields like a monument to tragedy. Decades had passed since the fire of the 1920s, yet the ruins remained, silent and stubborn, their windows gaping like hollow eyes. Townspeople avoided the place, crossing the street rather than walking near its rusted gates. But Emily felt its pull the same way she had felt the fire in the sky. On the night she chose to enter, the air was heavy with dampness, and the mansion seemed to breathe in the shadows. Inside, the walls bore the scars of flame, coated in soot that crumbled at the touch. The air smelled faintly of ash, though no fire had burned there for generations. Each step she took on the warped floorboards released a groan, a sound that seemed too alive for abandoned wood. Dust spiraled through the air, catching in the beam of her flashlight, and the silence was broken only by the faint rhythm of her own breathing. On the second floor, she discovered a room where time had not behaved as it should. Scattered across the floor were toys, brightly colored blocks, a wooden horse, and a cloth doll with button eyes that looked as though they had been placed there moments before. Their condition defied the decay of the house, untouched by soot or dust. Emily knelt to inspect them, and the moment her fingers brushed the doll, the floor seemed to vibrate with a distant echo, like the laughter of unseen children. The legend of the Hayward fire had been whispered through Grayford for years. It told of a mother driven to madness who locked her children inside the mansion before setting it ablaze. Witnesses claimed to hear their cries long after the flames consumed the house, and some swore that on certain nights, faces of children appeared in the windows, gazing out with sorrowful eyes. Emily had read the tale in old newspaper clippings, but now, standing in the very place, the story felt less like folklore and more like memory trapped in the walls. As the night deepened, the temperature inside the house dropped sharply. Emily's breath hung in the air, and her flashlight flickered, leaving her for moments in near total darkness. Then the walls shifted. The scorched wood shimmered as if touched by fire, glowing faintly orange. Flames crawled upward in silent waves, not consuming, but replaying the moment of destruction. Shadows of children appeared against the illuminated walls, small figures running, pausing, turning as though searching for an escape. Emily stood frozen, her heart racing as the silhouettes multiplied. They moved with a rhythm disconnected from her presence, like echoes repeating an event that could never end. The windows, once empty voids, now held reflections of children pressing their hands to invisible glass, their mouths forming words she could not hear. The absence of sound was more haunting than screams, as though the house itself had swallowed their voices. For a fleeting second, Emily felt as if the building was aware of her, as if the walls themselves leaned inward to draw her into the story. The glow faded, leaving only blackened wood and the toys scattered at her feet. Yet the weight of the vision lingered, pressing on her chest, reminding her that the past had not vanished. It remained, waiting, watching, repeating. When she finally stepped out into the night, the mansion stood silent again, its windows as dark as before. But Emily knew the faces she had seen would return, waiting for another witness to their endless fire. The Hayward house was not merely a ruin, it was a vessel of memory, and she had been marked by its story. Beyond the outskirts of Grayford stretched a forgotten dirt road, known among the locals as the Salt Road. It wound between stagnant marshes and skeletal trees, its surface pale and uneven, as if time itself had drained all color from it. Travelers rarely used it, claiming that the ground exuded a faint bitterness and that the air there carried the sharp tang of salt even miles from the nearest sea. By day, the road was nothing more than a neglected path, but at night, it became the subject of whispers, a place where stories clung more stubbornly than the fog. Emily drove down the road on a night heavy with silence. The headlights of her car cut narrow tunnels through the darkness, illuminating only fragments of the pale earth. As the tires rolled forward, the stillness pressed closer, until it seemed the world beyond her windshield had ceased to exist. Then, without warning, the engine stuttered and died. The headlights dimmed, the dashboard lights flickered out, and the car sank into a heavy quiet broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. On the glass of the windshield, a faint layer began to form, white crystals spreading in delicate, jagged veins across the surface. Emily leaned closer and saw the unmistakable shimmer of salt. It gathered in thin patterns like frost, marking the car as if claimed by the road itself. She touched the inside of the glass with her fingertip, but the cold came from the outside, from something beyond her reach. Through the spreading salt, she noticed shapes on the road ahead. Small figures, distant but unmistakable in form, stood motionless against the faint light of the moon. At first, she thought they were children, no taller than her car's hood. They did not approach, but their heads shifted slowly, unnaturally synchronized, until every faceless gaze fixed on her. Legends of the Salt Road told of such figures. Children without features who appeared on moonless nights, asking for rides in voices no one could resist. Some travelers said they carried the sound of ocean waves in their whispers, though no ocean lay within hundreds of miles. Others insisted they were not children at all, but remnants of something washed inland, something bound to the land by salt and sorrow. Those who opened their doors to the figures were never seen again. Emily's pulse hammered as the figures remained still, their silence more oppressive than sound. Her instinct urged her to move, to flee, but the car remained lifeless, its key turning without response. She sat rigid in her seat, afraid even to breathe too loudly. The salt on the windshield thickened, clouding her view, and the figures blurred into vague outlines that pulsed in and out of visibility. She stayed inside, gripping the steering wheel, refusing to open the door. The figures lingered, heads tilting with slow precision, their movements hypnotic and deliberate. Then, as the salt spread into a complete film across the glass, they began to dissolve. Their shapes wavered like smoke caught in a breeze, stretching thinner until they were gone, leaving the road empty once more. When the last trace vanished, the salt began to flake away, falling like pale dust onto the hood of the car. The engine sputtered to life on its own, the headlights flaring suddenly against the barren road. Emily drove forward without looking back, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Yet the silence of the salt road followed her long after she left it, and the memory of faceless children lingered in the corner of her vision, waiting for another night, another witness, another chance. The town of Grayford had long since abandoned its railway lines. The tracks had been torn up decades earlier, leaving only faint impressions in the soil where steel once lay. The station had collapsed into ruin, its roof buckled and walls choked by ivy. And yet, the memory of trains lingered. Residents spoke of nights when the air trembled with the sound of wheels grinding over rails that no longer existed, of mournful horns echoing across the streets as though time itself had forgotten the absence of the line. Emily awoke one such night to an unfamiliar vibration. At first it was faint, a low metallic rhythm threading through her sleep, but soon it swelled into the steady pounding of wheels clattering across unseen tracks. A beam of light cut across her bedroom window, sharp and white, slicing through the dark like a searchlight. The sound carried with it the scent of smoke and iron, impossible for a town without a working train. Drawn by the noise, she stepped outside into the cool air. The streets were quiet, but the ground beneath her shoes seemed to pulse with energy. Then she saw it, a train racing through the heart of Grayford, brilliant silver against the night. It had no rails to guide it, yet it moved with mechanical precision, its wheels spinning on nothing. The locomotive shone with unnatural brightness, as though carved from polished metal, untouched by rust or time. Its horn howled, long and sorrowful, and the echo clung to the walls of the houses. Through the lit windows of the carriages, figures stood in stillness. They resembled passengers, arranged in rows, their heads tilted forward as if in thought. Yet none of them bore faces. Their skin was smooth, featureless planes that caught the reflection of the passing lights. They did not shift or sway as the train moved, frozen in rigid silence like statues carved in haste. Emily felt an unnatural chill settle over her, the kind that pressed against her bones, warning her to remain where she stood. The legend of Grayford's phantom train whispered that those who strayed too near to the path of its passing would vanish. The engine was said to claim them, pulling them into its endless journey across a line erased from the earth. Once aboard, the taken never returned, their likenesses appearing instead among the faceless passengers for others to see. The townspeople spoke of family members who had disappeared without explanation, always after nights when the silver train howled through the dark. Emily held her ground as the phantom engine roared by, its wheels sparking against invisible tracks, its whistle splitting the air with a sound too mournful to belong to machinery alone. She watched the faces that were not faces drift past her, each window reflecting a piece of herself distorted into something hollow. The train blurred into the distance, its light dimming until it vanished entirely, leaving the streets empty and silent once more. The following morning, the air was heavy with unease. Whispers spread through the town when news reached the locals. A boy had gone missing. His family, who lived near the remains of the old station, reported that his bed was empty, the sheets still warm, and the back door left ajar. The town spoke in hushed voices, avoiding the subject openly, but Emily knew what they would not admit aloud. The boy had stood too close to the ghostly line, and the silver train had carried him away, adding one more faceless passenger to its endless journey through the night. The ruins of the old church stood in the center of Grayford like the skeleton of a forgotten guardian. Its charred beams and crumbling stone walls bore the scars of the fire that had devoured it in 1902, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. The steeple, blackened but still upright, reached toward the sky with defiance, and within it hung the single survivor of the blaze, the iron bell. Rust streaked its sides, yet it remained intact, its weight suspended as if it waited for a hand that would never come. Emily wandered there on a night when storms gathered above the town. The air was thick with electricity, heavy clouds pressing low until the horizon disappeared. Rain lashed at the windows of nearby buildings, and the wind carried with it a mournful sound that at first seemed like the shifting of metal. Then she realized it was the bell. The first toll was faint, muffled as though from a distance. Its vibration carried through the air like a shiver. She froze, her breath catching as the sound deepened. The second toll was louder, resonating through the broken church walls, rattling shards of glass still clinging to their frames. With each ring, the sound grew sharper until it felt as though the bell itself hung above her head, its iron voice reverberating inside her chest. The storm intensified. Flashes of lightning illuminated the blackened rafters, and in those brief instants, she saw shapes writhe across the walls. Shadows leapt and twisted in the light, not born of her body, but of something unseen. They resembled people caught in flight, running with arms outstretched, their forms writhing as if consumed by fire. The walls themselves seemed alive with their struggle, the outlines of bodies burning and breaking against the charred stone. The bell continued its relentless tolling. Each strike brought more clarity to the visions in the ruined church, until Emily could almost hear the screams of the long-dead congregation. The heat of invisible flames pressed against her skin, though the storm outside was cold and merciless. The air carried the acrid scent of smoke, sharp and bitter, though the ruins had not burned in nearly a century. Legends of Grayford whispered that the bell rang only in times of great misfortune, its sound heralding disaster yet to come. Some claimed it was the voice of the fire itself, refusing to release the souls it had claimed. Others said it was a warning, a desperate echo from those who perished, urging the living to flee what could not be stopped. The ringing reached its peak, deafening and constant, until Emily felt her vision blur. The shadows pressed closer, their bodies breaking apart into cinders that floated into the storm winds. She staggered back, clutching at the air as the final toll rolled across the night, reverberating far beyond the church walls into the heart of the town. Then silence fell, sudden and absolute, broken only by the hiss of rain. The next day, Grayford awoke to calamity. Heavy rain had swollen the river until it tore past its banks, consuming streets and homes in its furious current. Entire houses were swept away, and families fled through waist-high water. The old bridge collapsed under the weight of the flood, its timbers vanishing into the torrent. As she stood on the edge of the devastation, Emily knew the bell had spoken its warning. The town would dismiss it as coincidence, but the memory of its tolling lingered in her bones. In the silence after the storm, she could almost hear it still, waiting for the next time tragedy would demand its voice. The halls of Grayford University were quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and seemed to swallow every sound. Students whispered of a presence known only as the faceless woman, a specter that appeared in mirrors, and her legend had grown with each retelling. Emily, drawn by a mix of curiosity and dread, entered an empty lecture hall, its long rows of chairs catching faint light from high windows, dust motes floating like tiny stars in the beams. In the reflection of the large mirror at the back of the room, she saw a figure dressed entirely in white. Its skin was smooth and unbroken, without eyes, nose, or mouth, a blank canvas that defied human understanding. The figure stood perfectly still, yet its presence pressed against her awareness as if the air itself thickened around it. Emily turned instinctively, heart racing, but the hall remained empty. The silence deepened, and she felt the subtle, impossible sensation of being observed from behind. Slowly, hesitantly, her gaze returned to the mirror. The faceless woman had moved closer. Each step was measured, deliberate, yet no sound accompanied her advance. The reflection's blank visage seemed to stretch and shift, a quiet distortion of reality that made the edges of the glass ripple in ways her mind could not rationalize. Time lost its meaning as Emily watched. The reflection was no longer a mirror of the room, but a separate dimension layered over her own. The figure extended an invisible reach, a movement that hinted a touch, and a cold shiver passed through Emily's spine. A legend whispered in student circles surfaced in her mind. Anyone touched by the faceless woman would find their reflection no longer matching reality, a fracture between self and image that could never be mended. Panic drove her toward the door, but the hall seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit always just out of reach. She stumbled and glanced back once more. The reflection now filled the mirror, pressing against the edges of the glass as if the room itself had been overtaken. The blank face held no emotion, no threat, only inevitability, a certainty that the boundary between reflection and reality was fragile and temporary. Emily finally burst into the hallway, the mirror behind her silent and empty once again. The chill of the encounter lingered, a pressure in her chest and a numbness in her hands. Weeks later, she discovered subtle anomalies in her own photographs. Her image would twist, features stretching in impossible ways, her reflection betraying angles that could not exist. Each time she looked, a faint sense of being watched accompanied her, a reminder that the faceless woman's touch, even if unseen, had altered the fabric of her reality forever. The outskirts of Grayford were lined with stretches of old highway, long abandoned by maintenance crews, a place where the asphalt seemed to pulse faintly in the darkness. Emily drove cautiously, headlights cutting through the night fog, when her car suddenly stuttered and died. The engine refused to respond, and the surrounding air felt heavy, charged with something she could not see. Beneath her wheels, the road glowed with a pale, unnatural light, illuminating intricate patterns that resembled ancient symbols, their meaning just beyond comprehension, yet undeniably deliberate. She stepped out, the cold night pressing against her skin, and felt the vibration of distant engines, even though no vehicles were visible. The rumble grew louder, echoing along the empty highway, a sound that seemed both far away and impossibly close, like the heartbeat of a restless spirit. Emily realized the road itself was alive with memory, each glow and symbol a trace of what had occurred there decades before, a fatal race that ended in tragedy. As she watched, the patterns on the asphalt shifted, forming loops and spirals as though tracing the path of a car that had once driven too fast, too recklessly. The legend of the fallen racer seemed to awaken, playing out a spectral final lap in the deserted night. Emily's eyes widened as faint, glowing tire tracks appeared behind her vehicle, moving against the natural slope of the road, evidence of a presence unseen but intensely aware of her intrusion. The sound of engines became a whisper, a mournful echo that told of the speed, the loss, and the eternal replay of a fatal mistake. Every instinct urged her to leave, but the light beneath her feet kept her rooted, mesmerized by the ghostly traces of someone who could never finish their journey. Time stretched, the world around her dissolving into a blend of shadow, light, and memory, until she finally understood that the highway was not merely a road, but a conduit for the unresolved, where the past perpetually intersected with the present. When Emily finally managed to restart her car and drive away, the glowing symbols faded, the engine sounds vanished, and the road appeared ordinary once more. Yet she carried with her the haunting impression of the racer's final moments, a reminder that some journeys never truly end, and that the echoes of tragedy could linger, glowing faintly just beneath the surface of the world she thought she knew. On stormy nights over Grayford, locals spoke in hushed tones of a massive black bird with eyes that glowed like embers. They called it the Black Harbinger. Emily first saw its silhouette framed against a fork of lightning as she stood near the riverbank. The creature hovered with an unnatural grace, its wings spanning impossibly wide, cutting through the wind with a silent, commanding presence. When it cried, the sound was deep and resonant, like a brass horn echoing across the valley, vibrating in her chest and making the very air tremble. She watched as it circled the town, the glow of its eyes seeming to pierce every shadow, illuminating alleys and rooftops in a momentary, eerie light. The river below reflected the bird's fiery gaze, doubling its spectral presence and filling Emily with an inexplicable dread. Every instinct urged her to flee, yet she remained, captivated by the sense that this apparition was both ancient and inexorably tied to the land. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. The town awoke to tragedy. A section of the local mine had collapsed, taking the lives of several workers. The community whispered about the Black Harbinger, questioning whether its appearance had caused the disaster or merely served as a warning. Emily felt the weight of the legend, understanding that some forces in Grayford moved beyond cause and effect, existing only to mark the threshold between safety and catastrophe. She later retraced her steps along the river, noticing subtle signs of the bird's presence, a charred mark on a branch, a patch of disturbed earth, and the faintest echo of a horn-like cry. The memory of those glowing eyes lingered, and Emily realized the Black Harbinger was not just a creature, but a messenger whose appearance heralded irrevocable change. Its meaning remained a mystery, but its warning was unmistakable, leaving the town and its visitors with an uneasy certainty that some disasters are foretold and some forces watch silently from the storm. The river that wound through Grayford had always carried whispers of old promises and hidden dangers. Locals spoke of an ancient pact, claiming that the first settlers had vowed to the waters that it would provide fertile soil and abundant fish, and in return, every 50 years, the river would claim the souls of the living. Emily arrived at the riverbank under a full moon, the water silvered and trembling under the lunar light. At first, it was only the shimmer that caught her attention, but soon the surface rippled unnaturally, and faces began to form in the currents, pale, haunting, and impossibly detailed. As she watched, the faces shifted and twisted, showing expressions of fear, sorrow, and resignation. Among them, Emily recognized the face of a child who had gone missing just a month prior, his eyes wide with silent pleading. The water seemed to breathe, and with every pulse of the moonlight, the faces multiplied, pressing against the surface as though trying to speak. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and something metallic, a reminder of the lives claimed over centuries. Then, as if inscribed by some invisible hand, words appeared on the sandy bank. "Obedience to the vow is required." Emily felt the weight of the river's judgment in her chest, a cold and inexorable force pressing against her spirit. She stepped closer, noticing the water's surface reflecting not only the faces, but the faint outline of the town itself, distorted and fragile, like a memory teetering on the edge of reality. Every ripple seemed to pulse with a history older than Grayford, a cycle of life and death maintained by the unseen covenant. Though the river's glow slowly faded with the approach of dawn, the warning remained etched in her mind. The child's face lingered in her memory, a silent testament to the river's claim, and Emily understood that the pact was living, unyielding, and eternal. Grayford slept unaware of the river's nocturnal tribunal, yet she knew that the river waited, patient and vigilant, for the next fulfillment of its 50-year vow, a force indifferent to pleas and prayers, bound only by the ancient covenant of water and soul. The old bridge stretched over the darkened waters, leading to a part of Grayford long abandoned. Its wooden planks were slick with rain, each step echoing into the fog that clung to the river below. Emily approached under the cover of night, her flashlight flickering against the mist. On the far side, a figure stood motionless, draped in a heavy cloak that seemed to absorb the dim light. The face was obscured by shadow, yet the eyes glowed with an unnatural white luminescence, piercing through the darkness like twin beacons. As she drew nearer, the air grew colder, heavier, as if the bridge itself had become a barrier between the living and some otherworldly presence. The rain seemed to slow, falling in slow, deliberate drops that echoed the tension in her chest. Emily felt an almost magnetic force pulling her attention toward the figure, yet an instinctive fear rooted her to the spot. The legend of the Watcher was clear. Anyone who passed beneath its gaze would vanish, swallowed by forces beyond comprehension. Emily's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she circled slightly to get a better view, noticing that the figure remained unnervingly still, unblinking, yet somehow aware of her every movement. The mist around the bridge seemed to twist, forming vague shapes of travelers long lost, their expressions frozen in terror and resignation. The glow from the Watcher's eyes intensified for a moment, casting pale light across the wet planks and revealing scratches and marks from countless previous encounters. Unable to summon the courage to advance, Emily slowly retreated, each step weighted with the oppressive sense of being observed. Even as she descended the bridge and returned to the relative safety of the main road, the gaze of the cloaked figure lingered, etched into her perception, a silent sentinel of a place where time and space folded into something older and darker. The bridge behind her vanished into fog and shadow, leaving only the echo of the Watcher's presence and the realization that the path it guarded would claim anyone who dared challenge it. The outskirts of Grayford held an abandoned field, the remnants of a military camp that had been active decades ago during a long-forgotten conflict. The ground was uneven, dotted with rusting posts and scorched earth, and a low mist clung to the soil, curling like smoke from distant fires. Emily ventured into the field at night, drawn by rumors of the marching shadows, spirits said to haunt the place where soldiers had once trained and fallen. As she moved deeper, The mist thickened, and a rhythmic sound reached her ears. At first faint, it grew into the unmistakable cadence of marching feet echoing across the empty terrain. Through the haze, figures began to materialize, rows of soldiers moving in perfect formation. Their uniforms were tattered and outdated, relics of a past era, and their faces were hollow, featureless, as if carved from mist. Despite their proximity, they produced no sound except for the synchronized thud of boots striking the earth, a haunting drumbeat of the past. Emily felt the air grow heavy, charged with the weight of unfulfilled duty and lingering sorrow. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting around the marching figures, intertwining with their phantom forms. The temperature dropped sharply, her breath forming clouds as she struggled to move without disturbing the spectral procession. Every step she took seemed to pull her further into their world, as though the field itself were bending time and space to contain the endless march. The legend whispered that these spirits were the souls of soldiers who had perished in a catastrophic fire at the camp, condemned to repeat their final march for eternity. Emily observed them as they passed, the rows stretching beyond her vision, their rhythm unbroken and inexhaustible. The ghostly formation passed near her, and she felt a chilling pressure, a silent warning that any who interfered risked becoming part of the march themselves. By the time the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving only the faint echo of their footsteps, Emily was trembling. The field seemed lifeless again, yet she could sense the weight of countless souls lingering, bound by duty and tragedy. Even as she retreated toward the safety of the town, the rhythmic drum of the marching shadows remained imprinted in her mind, a reminder that some echoes of history refuse to fade, endlessly replaying of the horrors of the past for any who dare to witness them. Emily returned to the heart of Grayford after witnessing the spectral manifestations of each legend, feeling as if the city itself had absorbed every story and every shadow she had encountered. The square before her shimmered with an unnatural light, and the buildings surrounding it no longer adhered to a single era. Some appeared as brick and wrought iron structures from the 19th century, their chimneys puffing ghostly smoke, while others glowed with sleek metallic surfaces and neon edges, as if glimpsed from a future that had yet to arrive. Time itself seemed to fracture, folding in on moments past and moments that had not yet been. The air was thick with the resonance of the city's myths made real. The phantom train roared across streets that had no tracks, carrying faceless passengers whose eyes glimmered with cold light. Shadows marched in the plazas, their silent rhythm echoing from the old military camp, and the spectral bell tolled in cadence with the wind, each chime sending quivers across the cobblestones. Water from the river glimmered unnaturally, faces of the departed shimmering on its surface, reflecting both sorrow and warning. The faceless woman and the black herald hovered at the periphery, their presence both menacing and mesmerizing. Emily walked slowly, her steps echoing in the surreal cityscape, and everywhere she looked, the boundaries between reality and legend dissolved. The streets twisted impossibly, looping back upon themselves, leading her invariably to the same central square. On the ground, etched as if by invisible fire, words appeared. "You are a witness. The oath cannot be broken." The sentence radiated a strange warmth and dread, binding her to the city as if she were now a part of its eternal story. Every attempt to leave Grayford returned her to that square, the legends circling and whispering as if acknowledging her presence. The city was alive with echoes of past tragedies and unfulfilled promises, an intricate tapestry of memory and myth that refused to release her. Emily realized that she had become a guardian of these stories, a living witness tethered to a city that existed outside of time itself. Even as she wandered, the square remained the center of all things, and she understood that Grayford would never truly let her go, its legends and mysteries forever intertwined with her own existence.